For this lesson, I picked two of my favorite living jazz guitar masters, George Benson on the bebop side and John Scofield on the post-bop side. Some might even call it old school and new school side by side. Stylistically speaking, they sound so different on the surface, yet when you place their solos under the microscope, you'll be surprised to learn how much they have in common. And to prove this point, I have transcribed one chorus of each guitarist playing over the same up-tempo blues progression in the key of F. So next time I'm going to play each guitarist solo at a moderate tempo, trying to emulate their respective styles the best I can. After that, I will break down and analyze each one. I'm Richie Zellon, and I want to invite you to stick with me because you will be amazed as to what you will learn. Listen to George Benson's fifth chorus on his solo over Billy's Bounce from his early album, Giblet Gravy. Okay, full disclosure here. I can easily play a nice improvised solo over that progression, but believe me, it is an entirely different matter to sight read the transcription at that tempo and get all the nuances down. I would have to practice it for a few days, and I didn't see the point of delaying this lesson. So I in fact recorded it in 4-measure segments to get it down. And that is the same thing I did for this next one, which is even harder to get all the nuances down. And this is John Scofield's 7th chorus of his solo on Trio Blues off the album This Meets That. Let's examine George Benson's solo, and I'll play it in segments so you can hear it slowly. Also, please pay special attention to the melodic analysis because we are going to find many of these identical concepts in Scofield's solo. The first 3 measures are very diatonic and I would say triadic in nature. So we have 3, a 1, 13, 9, and the flat 7. The second measure is made up of a 5, a 3, a flat 7, again a 5, and a 3. And it's all very mixolydian. Now in the third measure, he is superimposing a G minor triad. We have the 5, the flat 3, and the 1. Let me play those 3 measures. 1, 2, 3, 4. In measure 4, he is using a fragment of an altered chord arpeggio, which is derived from the Superlocrian mode. Let me play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure 5 starts the 4 chord, which is again mixolydian based, and we have a 5, then the 4 acting as a passing tone to the 3, and finally the 9. Now in the 6th measure, he introduces one of the most characteristic melodic concepts of the bebop idiom, the enclosure. And we have the 6 and the 1 enclosing the flatted 7 followed by a 5, and then the 13th twice. Let me play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure 7 returns to F7 or the 1 chord, and here he plays an ascending dominant 9th arpeggio starting from the 3rd and approaching the 5th chromatically from below. And this is followed by a chromatic, which many would call a major 7, and then a 9. But that major 7 is really acting as a chromatic approach from below to the 1. Remember, this is a dominant chord. The 7th is a flatted 7th, not a major 7th, but a minor 7th. It is first an indirect approach, with the resolution being delayed by the upcoming 9th. But at the high tempo it is played, it really works fine. Now keep in mind that if you were to play this at a slow tempo, it might clash with the underlying dominant 7th chord. And we see the same chromatic then repeats this time, resolving directly to the 1, followed by the 9. Let me play it. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 8th measure is over a D7th altered chord, and here Benson is using various notes of a descending superlocrian scale to resolve down to the root of G minor 7. The line starts with a flatted 9, then we have a chromatic approach down to the flatted 6, followed by the 3rd, which, by the way, is written enharmonically for easier sight reading. Normally it would be in F sharp, and that is followed by the flat 2, the flat 7, flat 6, flat 5, and resolves to the G root on the 9th measure. Let me play it. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 9th measure, after playing the root, we have a pickup into the C7, which is the 5/7 of the key. And this is a 2 minor 7 chord, and of course uses a Dorian. And we have 2, flat 3, 5, and no, not a major 7, but instead a chromatic approach to the first note of the 10th measure, which is an F. Now, I want to point out that for the first half of this 10th measure, Benson is superimposing a D flat 7, which is the tritone substitution of G7, and resolves by half step down to the C7 in the second half. And so we first have the 3, 5, and flat 7 of the D flat 7 chord, followed by a fragment of a descending C superlocrian made up of sharp 9, flat 9, 1, and flat 7. Let me go ahead and play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 11th measure outlines a 2/5 to the G minor 7. So we initially have an A minor 7 arpeggio, the root, flat 3, 5, and flat 7, followed by a chromatic approach to the sharp 9 over the D7 altered. Finally, for the first half of the 12th measure, over the G minor 7, we have the 9, the 5, and flatted 7 of a G Dorian, followed by a C Mixolydian featuring a chromatic approach to the 13th, then the flat 7, and a chromatic note which resolves by half step up to the initial C, which would begin the next chorus. Let me play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you are enjoying this lesson, before we proceed to analyze and compare the content of John Scofield's solo to that of Benson's, I just want to ask you to please show your support for the Jazz Guitar channel with your likes, shares, and comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you already haven't done so. To proceed, I want to say that the main thing that we are going to find different in Scofield's playing lies in his use of articulation. While Benson picks almost every note in a very staccato fashion, Scofield does pretty much the opposite. He plays very legato using slides, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and in addition, overdrive, which adds sustain to his notes. Having said that, we are going to see that the melodic content, apart from some occasional wide interval leaps, are based on the same bebop concepts employed by Benson. Let's not forget that Scofield is from a younger generation than Benson, and most likely he listened to his recordings as well as those of other bebop guitarists during his early jazz education. And with this in mind, let's analyze his solo and see what it reveals. In the first measure, Sco starts on the fifth and slides down to the fourth, which in turn acts as a passing tone to the third. Then he reverses the line and goes back up using the same four, this time to resolve back to the five. In measure two, he plays around with the same notes, but this time throws the six in, again followed by the 5, 4, 3, and 5, ending the phrase on the third measure with a chromatic approach from below to the third. And it's all Mixolydian based and very diatonic indeed, just like Benson started out his chorus. Let me play it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure 4 introduces an enclosure here, which I pointed out earlier is a characteristic bebop concept. And he starts out with a chromatic approach to the third and then begins a chromatic enclosure from below and above to the 1. This is followed by a flatted 7 and a chromatic approach to the sharp 5 or flatted 13. This is evidence that he could well be thinking over an altered dominant, just like Benson also did over his fourth measure. And I'll play this. 1, 2, 3. The fifth measure, or 4 chord, has one of those classic wide interval leaps employed by Scofield. And the phrase starts with the 3, followed by the 5, the sharp 11, a leap up to the root, followed by the third, and back down to the root, and below to the fifth. Then on measure 6, he starts playing over a B flat minor pentatonic. Oh boy, getting into those traditional blues here. He starts with the 4, and plays the flatted 7, the 5, the 4, and then a sharp 4, which is what we call a blue note in the context of this scale, the pentatonic, the minor pentatonic. And then he goes back to the 4, the flatted 3, and ending the phrase with the root twice. Let me play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. On measure 7, Scofield this time plays an F minor pentatonic, the 4, the flatted 3, the 1, and a chromatic approach to the 5. Let me play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure 8 uses notes over the first half from a Phrygian dominant. A Phrygian dominant is simply you could look at it as a Mixolydian scale with the flatted 2 and the flatted 6. So the 3 and the 5 are just like the Mixolydian as well as the flatted 7, only that it has a flat 2, which is the flat 9 in this case. And in the second half, we have a superlocrian, and he's using the root, the flatted 13th, and the flatted 7 back again to the root. Let me play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure 9 begins the G minor 7 or 2 minor 7 chord with a flurry of eighth notes all the way to the last measure. Notice the amount of enclosures he uses in measures 9 and 10. He starts with an enclosure using the 6 and 4 to the 5, followed by the third. Then an enclosure using the 4 and 2 to the flat 3, followed by the root. Then he begins the 10th measure, or the 5-7 chord, with an enclosure using the 6 and a chromatic from below to the 5, followed by the 6. And this in turn resolves up to the flatted 7 and then leaps down to the 4, which resolves to the 3rd, followed by the 5th. This is a purely Dorian and Mixolydian based 2/5. So let me play it. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 11th measure takes us to the final 1 chord, and for the first half uses a 5, a 4, a 3, and a 2, which in turn resolves to the 3rd of the D7 flat 9 on the second half. And this is followed by a 3, a 5, a flat 7, and the final note is an anticipation and also the root of the upcoming G minor chord. I'm going to play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we've arrived at the 12th measure or turnaround. Interestingly enough, here he seems to start with the flatted 3 of the G minor, but then shifts to a G7 flat 9 by introducing a chromatic approach to the root, followed by a flat 9 and the 3rd. Actually, the initial flat 3 can also be analyzed as the sharp 9 of a G altered chord. And to conclude, over the C7, he introduces another enclosure, this time using the 2 and 4 to the 3rd, ending with a 2 resolving to the C, which begins the next chorus. Let me play that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, what do you think? I think this lesson again proves that bebop is the foundation of all jazz as we know it today. In other words, there is no post-bop without an underlying bebop foundation. You can compare a solo by Charlie Parker to one by John Coltrane, and although you will find new added elements in Train's solo, you will find all the familiar bebop elements too. That's why, as a jazz educator, I structured the Bebop Guitar Improv series. 2 online 12-month courses and 6 books which cover every aspect of jazz improvisation from beginner to advanced, with all the necessary exercises to take your playing step by step to the next level. So if you want to acquire a solid foundation, for more info, please be sure to check out my site at bebopguitar.richiezellon.com. I hope you have enjoyed this lesson, and until we meet again, peace be with you.